Hello, my name is Greg Kalten, and I'm a solution architect with Broadcom.
And my name is Alex Price, and I'm an applications engineer with Broadcom.
Today, we're going to go over a little bit about who Broadcom is. We have a short video to show you. There's a saying that 99% of all internet traffic goes across some piece of Broadcom technology. After the video, we're going to talk about how Broadcom did migrations prior to VMware, and then with the VMware migration and its complexities, how we completely changed our migration approach, and then look at some of the results. So let's flip over to the video real quick.
We are a world of connections. We are connecting generations and next generation applications. We are connecting those on the road and those on the front lines. We are connecting teams and their biggest fans. From advancing the latest mobile and home devices to driving cloud innovation, accelerating AI, and securing our digital world, Broadcom designs and develops technologies that power digital ecosystems, making every connection possible, from the edge to the data center, connecting virtually everyone to their everything, virtually everywhere. We are Broadcom. We are connecting everything.
We're just going to hop right into our Broadcom migration of VMware content into our system. And I do want to start off by saying that, working with Greg and with VMware, it really turned our entire migration approach upside down. And what we ended up with was a far, far more effective solution than what we were doing with package-based migrations. And that's really what we're going to give an overall overview. Overall overview. Yeah, good job. So you can see here on our slide deck, we started off, this was our Broadcom TechCom site before the VMware migration. And whenever we migrated into VMware content, or we pulled the VMware content in, we added 5 tiles and we were done. And it took about maybe 30 seconds or so. In reality, there was a lot of work that went into that, right? First of all, I've mentioned before, our division and product-based architecture allowed this drop-in, or looks like a drop-in approach across our architecture. But behind that was about 1 million pages of content, I think. More than 1 million. So, and then behind that also, to support it, we spun up a new AEM environment with 1 author and 2 publishers. And Greg put together an API-based content migration database. And we were able to support topic versions and versions on maps, and labels and automatically generated baselines. And then at the end of the day, we ended up stitching the 2 AEM environments together at the CDN level in order to make it appear as if it is one system overall. Okay, so I want to back up a little bit and give a little bit of a history here, just to kind of set the stage for why we were in a position, why we needed to have the second AEM environment. First, back whenever we were called Avago, or even before we were called Avago, when we were LSI and then we were acquired by Avago, we had a different CCMS. We had a Vassant-based CCMS. If anybody here had Vassant's experience in those days, yeah. All of our editing most of it was through FrameMaker, and we had an EDD, and we also had Oxygen. We had really no online capabilities to support no online presence whatsoever. And a little bit of HTML5, the generation that we needed to do, we did it through WebWorks. Over time, we've run through maybe 12 or a few more acquisitions. Those include Emulex and Brocade, which was a big one. And then Broadcom, when we gave up Avago and picked up the name for Broadcom. And then CA and Symantec. And then there were some other smaller acquisitions that actually fit in there. But until the CA migration, this was more of just an expansion of our system. It wasn't actually a fundamental change in what we were doing, right? Everything was either I did a migration, or a FrameMaker template migration. Our environment grew, but everything pretty much remained the same. And then once we hit CA technologies, that was an entirely different situation, right? CA used a Confluence-based wiki in order to generate and provide 1 million pages of content, or 1.5 million pages of content. They also had divisions that were using Drupal, and they had different divisions that were using Madcap. they did not have anything that was in pure DITA. So that's what we picked up with. And we had, by our executive team, we were given about 5 months to select an overall content architecture. Again, CA was not using DITA. Select the CCMS to support it all. Determine how to host a website, which we had never done before. Spin up and configure the CCMS and design our website, and then migrate all the content from our Vassant Broadcom system and all the content from the various CA systems into whatever CCMS we had selected, and then train everybody and publish it and go live in about 5 months. And we actually made it, which was amazing. So real quick, we did end up using DITA. We needed a CCMS that was end-to-end and had all the capabilities that you would expect. One of the things that's important to mention is that we had very limited support. Broadcom runs extraordinarily lean. We had all of 2 people, myself and one other person, and then we had maybe 2 full-time equivalents as our implementers and on the go forward. So we needed to find a system that did not require a team of people behind it in order to keep it working and functioning. AEM Docs was the solution for that. And this was, I believe, in 2018, 2019 timeframe. We were originally on 6.4.2 AEM and Guides 3.3, although it was Docs at the point in time. And you can see there, they're actually spinning up and releasing the brand new advanced map editor. Somebody mentioned that, very kindly mentioned that, other groups were using Oxygen as an editor because of the formative state of the Guides editor at the time. That's true. So we ended up doing a package-based migration on everything, right? The path was pretty simple. I'm sure we're all familiar with it. Convert everything to DITA, package it, upload it, install it, generate it, verify it, see if it all works, repeat until it does. And then once it does, you can publish it, right? This gave us a lot of different limitations. And this is going to get into a little bit of more what they are. But when you migrate that, you could not really apply labels or you could not apply versions onto different topics. For each topic version that was coming in, it consumed a new UUID, right? And the same thing for each topic map version that came in. It was a new UUID. There was no way to pull the system in and then get 15 versions of this one topic under a single UUID. We didn't have a way to do that, right? Also, major issue was that labels were not included in the baseline. So topics did not get labels by default, and baselines were not included in the migration either, right? That allowed, on TD1, since it was a non-UUID system, users could copy and paste folders. That creates a lot of issues down the road as some of our product groups, and we have a variance here inside of the company, but some of the product groups have behaved very, very well and cleaned up their content and their old versions and are using baselines and using the system as intended. Other product groups less so, and whenever they need to make a new version, they take that folder inside of AEM and they copy it and they set up a new output preset, and that's how they get to their new version. It's not an efficient or effective use of a CCMS, to say the least. So we also ran into, UUID issues, and we ran into the overall size of the database created a problem. So that kind of brought us to the need for TD2. TechDocs 2, it's our second AEM environment, and we just did not think that we had the space on the system or the UUIDs in order to support the second environment. So that takes us up to the VMware migration. I'm going to hand over.
Thank you.
I'll take your place.
So, starting point for the VMware migration was a CCMS that was 14 years old, had DITA, just about 2 million maps and topics in there, a couple 100,000 images, 13,500 products. I did not know we could sell that many things, but that's what we had, product versions. We were publishing to a doc site that had over 1 million pages, and that was about 8 years old. And then we had a second source of information. We have a release notes tool that's embedded into Jira and Bugzilla that provides a form-based creation or curation of release notes creation that publishes directly to the site. So these are the things that we needed to move into an AEM environment. So the goals we had was, one, preserve reuse. Every single piece of information that we were using was used in multiple ways, from either shared topics, conrefs, heavy use of variables. Secondly, we only wanted to move what was relevant. If you saw before, we had 2 million objects and only 1 million pages. That told me there was a lot of content that had been unpublished and just was left in the CMS that we did not want to move that forward. Third, we needed to be able to refresh our migration after it happened. We knew moving this amount of content into AEM, there was going to be a window where we're going to be cleaning it up, working with it, building and publishing it. And when that was done, we still had, while that was going on, we still needed to do business as usual, and we were still publishing to our old doc site. So in that window of time, we needed to get that content that we've already migrated, that was updated, refreshed into guides, and do that in an intelligent way. We also needed to move our localized content where possible because we didn't want to relocalize it. And then the final goal, and this was my goal, is that when we were done, I wanted all that content that was in guides to look like it had been created there initially. There would be no appearance of that had been migrated or whatever. It just looked like it was created from guides from day one. So the strategy to do that, first, we needed a content architecture. How were we going to map that content coming out of the VMware CMS and put it into guides? Second, aligning the product models. 13,500 products were not going into the AEM system, so we had to define the limited product information because Broadcom simplified our product models significantly. So we had to map the product information coming out of VMware and put it into guides. Third, a label strategy. We set a standard that every piece of content that went into the TD2 environment was going to use a dynamic baseline with labels from the start. No exceptions. Fourth, this isn't really strategy, but it is really key to what we did. We created a migration database. We created a database that sat between the two environments and allowed us to model exactly how that content was going to look inside guides before we put it there. Then our DITA conversion, DITA in, DITA out. It's not always that easy. There were a lot of changes we had to make in the DITA models themselves, in the content moving along. And then the final strategy is like, how are we going to use the APIs that exist inside guides and build a set of tools to make all this happen?
So we did have a fundamental difference in our architecture of our system. VMware used user guides, installation guides, application guides, all these different guides. Whereas Broadcom's approach was you have one set of product documentation and everything gets loaded into that one page. And we do not generate separate guides off of that. We have your one go-to source of truth, and that's it. So that was a fundamental difference that we needed to account for, right? It was still a work in progress, actually, to get writers to mentally switch to this approach. We may end up actually with the VCF9 migration, with the new migration. It's basically going to be trying to get people more in line with that as we go forward. That's about it for that slide, right? I'll put you back.
So the first thing we need to do was align the product models. So we knew from the VMware content, the product information, product name, product version was stored in all the root maps in the prologue. On the website, there was meta tags that identified what product version everything was associated with. So we wrote two crawlers. One walked the CMS, extracted every product version that existed in the CMS, wrote it into our migration database. Same thing, walked the site, found every product version that existed, put that in there. One of the initial things we saw with this is we were seeing a lot of content that was used by old versions and new versions. The old versions were not going to be migrated, but the new versions were. So we knew we had more content we were pulling than we expected. Second, once we had all that product information, we started generating a lot of spreadsheets, and we were handing them out to writing managers, business unit owners, and so they could start identifying, hey, what business unit was this product going to belong to? Because we're moving VMware from one company into 5 business units inside Broadcom. And then for each product version, what's the disposition? Are we going to migrate it? We're just pulling legacy PDF. We're just leaving it behind and archiving it. This took 4 months, and it was a bit of a battle. If you asked a writer if their product version was staying, oh, absolutely. If you asked the manager, nope. So we had to get through that cultural battle. And, but as I said, 4 months. This took longer than the migration itself to get that decision.
This was a very big deal and a huge struggle and effort to try to get the product group. And it really was kind of building alignment inside of the group for what we are going to be doing. And that's the tool that was used to get it done.
Right. And we found products that we couldn't find others. Test products, you name it. All the sins of the past came forward. So then labels. So as we said before, everything was all the content going into TD2 was going to use a dynamic baseline. So coming out of the VMware CMS publication, which is essentially a route map with context, everyone required a distinct label. So once we had done the mapping to the products, we gave every AEM product or every Broadcom product a unique ID or a unique code. We had the product version number, so we took that, and then we decided we were going to use the title type and give each one of those types a unique code. So user guide is UG, design guide DG. Marry those three pieces of information together. You get a unique label that can be used. So every piece of content that comes out of the VMware CMS for that publication will get that label when it goes into guides. Now, you would think that'd be pretty straightforward, but I can tell you there's 35 different ways to write the title for a user guide. Product at the beginning, product at the end. So we spent a lot of time synthesizing through all these different titles to really decide what type of guide it was. As I've mentioned before, we used the migration database. This allowed us to store our product mapping, what our labels were going to be, and every piece of information that we decided would come out of the VMware CMS and go into guides were recorded here. And once the migration was run, we recorded back here everything that happened. So we had a complete real-time view of every object that came out, where it was, what path it had, what UUID it got inside the guides, what labels were applied to what version. And that becomes important further downstream. The DITA conversion. So as I said, DITA should be an easy thing to move, but the CCMS we were coming out of, Tritium Docs, had some unique features that were in it. So using variables instead of keys, we had specializations we needed to unwind. Broadcom straight out of the box did no specializations, mostly around the PH tag. So we had to unwind those. Conditions in the CCMS are packaged with single attribute. We needed to move that out into the 4 standard conditional attributes that Oasis DITA used. And then the most important thing in the DITA conversion was the GUID to the UID. Our CMS used the GUID model that was very closely aligned to how UUIDs are defined in guides. We wanted to preserve that. So if the GUID was, GUID 1, 2, 3 in the VMware CMS, we wanted it to be the GUID, the exact same GUID with the language code suffix applied to it. That had to be maintained. That was critical. So when people started working with their content, if they needed to go back and find where they came from, we had a way to do that without them calling us first to say, hey, where did you get this from? That also made it a lot easier to update your references. So we didn't have to go through and say, okay, this GUID became this UID. Now we're going to go back and update every href and conref that points to this in the source content. We just needed to append the language suffix to it. And then the way we constructed help IDs for our online help on the VMware doc site was slightly different. The information was still on the map, but the way Broadcom was doing it was slightly different, so we had to map that. So if you remember, I said that one of the goals was we wanted this content to look like it was natively created in guides. Well, the best way to do that is to let guides create it. So we sat down and we started tracing what guides does. We discovered every API they call inside, to do their work. So if you want to create a topic, you want to update a topic, you want to add a label, remove a label, add an image, publish it, localize it, you name it. We went through, we found 52 APIs. We built an SDK on top of that so that we now have our own piece of code. We sat down with Adobe. They showed us how to embed credentials into that so we could make calls without having guides open or anything like that. Direct calls from code. We now have an SDK that anything you could do to content, guides from a manipulation creation perspective, we can now orchestrate and do without using the UI. So if you want to take an example of this is a piece of pseudocode on what you would do to create a piece of XML. So if you're sitting down in the guides UI, you create it. You say where you want to put it, the path, what template do you want to use to create it from. There's an important thing there. You see uuid.dita. When you create a piece of content or a piece of XML content in guides, if you make your name the UUID that you want, you'll get the UUID. If you dictate what the UUID is versus guides telling you what's giving you a new one. Once you've created it, you rename it, validate the XML. There's an internal call where you can just pass XML to it and say, hey, tell me if this is well-formed and valid. If that passes, then we update it and say, I'd create it as a new version. Now I've created, that gives me 1.0. I've updated it with the real content, that becomes 1.1. Now I add whatever labels I need. And then we get the labels. We immediately get the labels back. And early in our migrations, we were running into issues where we had label mismatches. So we started getting the labels back to check where our problem was. Once we fixed the bug, we left this in here as a sync. There's a sanity check just to make sure everything was going as planned. And then if you were a root map, we would create the baseline and give it the baseline and the label name would match. We would apply the labels. So we built a toolbox. You can't just do all these things with one tool. So as I mentioned before, we had the CMS. We had to get from the CMS to AEM, and we used the guide or the migration database as the basis to do all this. So the first thing we did, now we have all our product mapping information. Go back and scan the CMS again and give me all the publications where the product is marked as migrate. Pull all that information across. And while we did that, we generated a report for each publication that said, hey, writer, these are the things that may cause you problems. Here's all your conditions that don't map, because the conditions that you're using in Tridian can be very complex and, unbound and ands and ors and nested. Just they're not mapping to the new simple model of the four attributes. Variables where you didn't declare values, you just took a default value in the tag. That's not going to work in the key map. Things where you had your titles where you're going to use to generate object names that were going to be too long. So we showed them all the things with, if they didn't clean it up in the VMware CMS, they were going to have to clean it up in AEM. So we ran that. We got all the information that we knew we needed to put into guides. The migration database now holds a complete representation of everything we want to put in guides, but it's not there yet. So the first thing we do is we migrate. The migration tool would, as Alex mentioned before, the hierarchy of the information inside our guides architecture is business unit. A business unit can have multiple product families. A product family can have multiple products. A product can have multiple documents or guides. So we created a migration. You run at any one of those levels. You could migrate a BU all in one shot, or you could migrate a product family. You could migrate a product. But the key thing in that migration was, since we had all the information in the migration database that told us what we were going, we knew where all the shared content was. So if a topic is used by two different publications within a product, we would put it in a shared content folder, independent of the publication. Or if it was shared across products, we would put it at the product family level. If it was shared across product families, we put it at the business unit level. So we knew where everything was going to go. A migration utility you had to create, knew every folder it needed to create, and then it started orchestrating. It was basically a playback. The data inside the migration just became an input to the script. Create a topic, create a version topic, create a version, create the next topic, create a version, create a version. We just let it run. And we did 10,000, 15,000 topics over periods of time. Once that's done, the writers would go in and start doing their cleanup. We mentioned that this was going to take several months, 6, 7 weeks it took. So while they were doing that, we wrote a utility that would go and crawl AEM or crawl guides and write back into our migration database the current state of everything. Every topic, every version that had a label on it. So now when we went back and ran our refresh and found everything that had changed in the last 7 weeks, we could go look and say, oh,
that topic became version 1.3 with this UUID and had this label. Well, does that label still exist on 1.3? If it does, we can just move that updated content, add it as a new version, move the label. If they've both been, if it's been changed in the VMware CMS, changed in guides, we notify the writer, hey, this changed in both places. We're just not going to overwrite your changes. You need to go make this change yourself. Also with the refresh, there was always publications that popped up. Oh, this should have been included. Can you add it now? So we updated the refresh utility to pull in new content, but it did an additional level check that says, have any of these topics been moved? I'm not moving it again if it's been moved. I'm just going to add the label to the version that should have it. So that'll allow our refresh to work. Once refresh is done, we now have all our source content, all our English content in guides, and it's starting to publish out. After the refresh was finished, we cut off anybody publishing to the doc site. We turned off publishing so that everything now was going to be on the new site. But the old site's still there. We still have our localized content. So now we started the localization process. So Broadcom will publish the 3 alternative languages from English or Spanish, French, and Japanese. However, we had made commitments in some of our contracts as VMware to localize to more languages. By the time the acquisition happened, VMware was steadily localizing to 12 languages. So the agreement was anything that had been localized and put on the VMware doc site, we would pull that forward for any product version that we were still supporting. However, we've moved this content in. People started manipulating it. They've started adding new topics, moving things around. So it couldn't just be as simple as, let's just go send that to localization and they'll figure it out, right? So we started creating, we had our localization team create all the projects they needed to send the content to our translation vendor. And there was maybe 65 projects because we had a lot of different term bases and translation memory that was specifically tuned to each product. Well, if you just go into the Guides UI and pull up the send to localization, you want to send to an existing project, you have all your content there pulled by baseline. There's no way for a user to look at that and say, well, I know that topic was migrated and it hasn't changed, so I should be able to migrate it, but we just eliminated the UI. We basically scanned, we pulled the baseline from the map. We figured out which pieces of content we could pull the migrated content or pull the content from the VMware CMS, sent that to one project. And then, and then the other content that had either been changed, was net new, never existed in the VMware CMS. We sent it to a second project that we would then send to the translation vendor. The projects that were used for basically as a proxy to migrating from the CMS, we just did an export and import that basically seeded all our content, updated every UUID to be to have the proper language suffix. And then we went back and essentially ran a variant of the migrate to pull all that content in. And it didn't need to create any versions because the export import did that for us. We just added versions in. So basically if you were to go look at the version tree of any of those topics, the first topic has the English content, and then the second version has the localized content. So how do we use all these tools? I've kind of alluded to that a little bit, the way this has been going, but there's a saying, well-run projects are 90% preparation and 10% execution. That was true in our case, by far. We continually ran this process against our stage environment. We would go look at the results, figure out if we had any bugs. If we did, we would either go fix, make changes in our migration database or change the tools themselves, go into CRXD, whack the folder, do it again. We ran this hundreds of times until we got it exactly the way we wanted it, and we'd be right. By the time we ran it in production, it was a formality. So as I mentioned before, we had given the writers reports on all the publications they were going to move. So while we're running our tests, they're cleaning up their content. By the time, when the BU was ready, they'd let us know. We would run their content. 3 of the BUs we ran could run it in one shot. We didn't need to break it up. Their content set was small enough. We did the first one on August 28th, took about 12 hours. Ran the next one a week later, took a little longer. By the time we got to VCF, which is essentially the bulk of VMware, we ran that at the end of September. Alex and I, poor man, parallelization. We used 2 laptops instead of 1. That took 6 days. Timing, it took about 3 seconds to create a topic, and then Flip Team 1 and 1.5 seconds add a version. You're talking about tens of thousands of topics. And then there's some aggregate delay in there as you're updating the database. So you have all the statistics and your metrics, back in that migration database. So August 28th, end of September. So that's about a 6-week window to actually do the migration. They took about a month to 6 weeks to do their cleanup. We did the refresh at the end of October. We spent the bulk of November building the localization process because we didn't know exactly what that was going to look like until we actually had content there. And then we ran the migration process, which took longer because, when you run when you did the initial migration, you're just doing English. Now you got to do that for 12 languages. You're running that migration 11 times across, 60 or 70 different localization projects. Plus you're waiting for the content to come back from the vendor where you did send it to them. That finished up around the end of January. We turned the VMware site off January 30th. So let's talk about some of the results.
You can just go forward here. So this is me sort of shooting myself in the foot a little bit here after you heard everything that Greg did. Our TD1 system, as of whenever I did this slide a few days ago, our CCMS is around 430 gigabytes, which is pretty good or pretty big, right? And we've got around 1,100,000 pages published on it. But you can see there are total miscellaneous topic and map and DITA count, and I guess images are in there too. But we've got basically a 1-to-1 ratio on TD1 between pages, DITA topics, and pages generated. It's not quite that bad. As I said earlier, some of the product groups have done an outstanding job in cleaning up their content, using baselines and using the system as it's designed. Other product groups, less so. But that's where we were at with our TD1 environment right now.
The TD2 numbers are a lot lower. I mean, we started with 2 million topics. We ended up with, I did the math earlier, 75,000 UIDs or UIDs, 100,000 versions. But that's producing 285,000 pages. That's not including images. So the reuse level was maintained. I didn't mention how we changed RNA, which is our release notes tool. It was publishing directly to the site. So it was taking data and just producing HTML and putting it on the doc site. We changed that. We took the SDK. We actually made it publish data and push it into guides. And then that release note content along with the other product information was then published or built and published in larger maps through the doc site. Then from a localized perspective, we ran about 200,000 UUIDs. So we basically took 15% of our content out of the CMS and are producing the same number of pages that was on the doc site. It just shows how much information that was just legacy on our CMS and our CCMS. And if we use the old methods that Broadcom had done in the past, we would have probably moved 4x, 5x the amount of content in a much more painful fashion, and then had to undo all that once it got in guides.
That was exactly what we would have ended up. You can keep whatever.
All right, go ahead.
That was exactly what we would have ended up having to do, though, and what we did in our previous migrations was, you had to do the lift and shift, but you're going to lift pretty much everything because you're afraid that you're not going to get it all. And then whenever you shift it over, then you hand it over to your product groups, and your product groups are tasked with cleaning it up and streaming down their content. And some of them behave very, very well, and some of them less so. So anyway, as we are moving on here to how we make it all look as one site, right? So when you go out to techtalks.broadcom.com, you cannot see the difference between what came from VMware content and what came from previous Broadcom content. We do have 2 different author environments behind it and 2 published environments behind it, or 4 publishers behind it. And we link it all together inside of the CCMS. Inside of the CDN. The routing rules, we use routing rules inside of our CDN in order to direct traffic. And it's not really grand magic or anything like that, but the routing rules did get a little bit complex. We couldn't just key in on, say, VMware or something like that, because we had a lot of our Broadcom products that used VMware content and had VMware content in their pathing, or VMware in their generation path. So we couldn't just key on that simple term. So we had to do some somewhat snazzy filterings. And you also have to make sure that you have consistency across your headers and your footers, because you're now maintaining environment content in 2 places at once. And if we can go forward here, this is just our previous environment before VMware came into us. And you can see we just have a guide set up with sites and author. We have 2 publishers and 2 dispatchers in front of those, connected to the load balancer and CDN. And then the VMware environment is basically a mirror of that. There is some stuff on the bottom side that was extra for VMware that was just needed, and we need to bring it in. It's helping to support the RNA tool or release notes tools and things along those lines. But it's basically the same exact environment. And then when we go on to the next slide, this is our combined monstrosity, where we have, the 2 author environments with Search Unify and Acrolinks and XTM and the extra stuff that we have in there for VMware as well. And then the 4 publishers and 4 dispatchers connected together into the CDN.